Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. I'm so happy to join you. Very happy to be here with the Austin Organic Gardeners, and thank you to everyone who's tuning in on the stream. Also, if you're going to be watching this on the replay, we appreciate you. So I wanted to develop a presentation around spring gardening in Central Texas that's really unique to just my personal experience growing here in Austin. And so I'm hoping that there is something in it for everyone, whether or not you've been a longtime gardener or you're new to gardening in Texas, because that's the first thing that I want to get into. So I've been gardening here since around 2007. I built my first raised bed in late 2008, and I think I turned around and I had 20 after that. I just really got the fever. I love growing food for my family, and I love sharing food with my friends and my family and whoever else I can give it to, right? I mainly grow vegetables, flowers, herbs. I love citrus trees. I have a large collection of container citrus, which is probably coming around to bite me these last few winters. But for nearly 13 years, I worked for the Natural Gardener in South Austin, and I really learned a tremendous amount working with those folks down there, and from John Dromgoole, as well as the customers, the people who were new to our area, the questions they asked, the problems they had, and that really informed me in my gardening practice, but also in how to approach and talk about gardening, because it's a little tricky here. So I really set out on a mission to become a gardening educator, and I'm real interested in production. Started making YouTube videos. I have over 200 YouTube videos on my channel, and I offer private consultation and coaching, as well as maintaining two pretty good sized gardens at the University of Texas with the UT Farm Stand. Really beautiful gardens, and that is in an effort to demonstrate a sustainable food growing system. So it's really a lot of cool stuff going on there. But I am from New Garden Road originally in Greensboro, North Carolina. That's where the name comes from, and I learned from my family garden and first got my hands in the soil. So a quick overview of the discussion for today, interseasonal concepts, crop selection, adaptive strategies. I really just kind of want to get into it. And one of the things that I say often, practically every time on my YouTube videos, is I'm here to inspire, inform, and elevate. And that is, part of my core mission. But tonight with this section, I want to focus on calibration. We're going to calibrate a little bit to growing in Central Texas. So results vary. So the question is, what is spring gardening in Central Texas? Because I think, what I hear is a lot of different takes on this. If you are starting out in Texas, you're from Texas, you're probably familiar with the weather patterns. But if you're coming from another location, such as maybe Southern California or Colorado, it's going to be quite a different take. So, is it the best time to garden, or is it a official start to the season? Is it a warm period of rapid transition? It's like goes by in the blink of an eye, if you ask me. Spring can happen any day of the week, any week of the year here. That's kind of what it feels like.
2 weeks.
Yeah. So that being said, I want to explore this concept. If you're from the area, you may be familiar with this planting guide from the AgriLife Extension Service, which is the Vegetable Garden Planting Guide. This is a great resource. It's a guide. You can experiment. It doesn't encompass every single crop that you can grow. It also doesn't have herbs and flowers and different things like that on it. But I think if you look at it, it gives you a pretty good sense, right? We have and hopefully you can see it well, but they're the first columns, January and February, there are a lot of crops stacked up. And then it changes for March and April. We have some different selections, a little bit of crossover. And then, of course, once we get into the hottest part of summer, it's a little bit nil. But then again, September, October, firing up almost as a mirror to the January and February options. So very unique place to grow food, very rewarding. Um, so I kind of like to boil it down this way a little bit. This is very general, okay, because this doesn't work in straight lines. But if we plant those options available to us in January and February, we can expect a spring harvest. Planting in March and April with the right selections yields an early summer harvest. And then July through August is really what we plant for a fall harvest. And then September through November, you can harvest through the winter. So I just think this helps to kind of paint the picture of when to expect the food, because we know it's time to garden, but oftentimes we go out there and we see the poppies, we see the tomatoes, and we say it's time to plant tomatoes. But we have to, rewind the tape. So I hope that's helpful. That's just a little bit of perspective that I take from that garden guide. Yeah, so for instance, things like garlic, we plant in November, we harvest in late spring. So that's counter, to what I just kind of laid out there. But if we want to go a little faster, we've got a lot of crops that will harvest pretty quickly. These radishes, lettuce, Asian greens, very quick, 30 to 45 days often. So that's within the same season, and you can do multiple plantings. So just kind of showing how we can work outside the box here while also getting some type of guidelines for us. I also think it's important to note, like, I mentioned radishes, they're not all created equal, right? If you want to plant some fast growing radishes, you're not necessarily looking at, like on the right here with the daikons, going to take around 60 days, something like the Easter egg mix, pretty fast. So if you're just kind of grabbing something, make sure you're looking at that designation for how long it takes for them to mature, and we're going to discuss that going forward. All right, so one thing about these fall and winter plantings, we're making our way to spring, I promise. It's important to understand the sun exposure is less direct. We have less daylight hours. Plants are not going to grow as rapidly. So understanding that number of when you can expect the harvest and then adding some more time to it is a reasonable thing to do. Because if you're kind of really marking it on your calendar and this packet says 60 days, why isn't it ready in 60 days? Well, that sun is really low on the horizon. You're going to have some different exposure in your garden, because a lot of these are spring selections, right? That we're growing through the winter into the spring. Yeah. Other examples like the Tokyo Bacana, that's a really nice loose head cabbage that matures quickly. Kale, and then on to the collards here, 75 days. So if I'm looking to plant something now, I'm probably looking at things on the faster side, right? Because I don't know about you, but it gets hot really quick. We discussed what is spring here in Central Texas. Is it a season or is it in between? So especially if we're waiting, if we're getting crops in like February, like I want to get one more round of these crops in, it's important to look at that designation and be strategic, choosing something that's fast, and that will be more successful. Okay. More examples here. If you're looking at broccoli, broccoli rabe, very fast, 45 days, all the way up to the Waltham there, 80 to 85. So you've got choices to make. You can get some of the flavors you like, Just be particular in your strategy. Now, one thing that's important to note is that these cool season plantings, they really benefit. We were having a good discussion here at the beginning uh, of how we're going to protect our crops in the winter and ways we can get them through, severe cold. Uh, some of these things will get established over a period of cool temperatures. Like we've had a really nice season here where we've gotten down close to freezing. I haven't really had freezing temperatures in my garden, but it's enough to touch those crops to get them to start becoming adapted. So they're preconditioned in a sense by the cold weather. And along with that, we're staggering plantings. It gives us a chance to grow as much as possible. You can start seeds indoors and outdoors. I'll start seeds outdoors year round. I have some going now. It does get pretty dodgy. Like next week, probably, going to be tough, but you can do it with some adaptations such as a cold frame or even making a hoop structure over your seed starting array. There's ways you can do it, and you may have to bring them inside for periods of time. But I want to stress that one of the things over the years that has been a challenge for me is understanding to leave room for the warm season crops because I can be fully planted out with whatever available space that I have. And then where am I going to plant my tomatoes and my cucumbers? Because I really want to do that, but I don't necessarily want to pull my broccoli or some of my other crops. So a little bit of strategy there and understanding how we can go over the course of the year and continue to grow, but also be mindful of the boundaries. So I want to touch on the crop selection a little bit. I'm really going to highlight some of my favorites. I know we've got a good variety of gardening experience in here, so I look forward to hearing from you with your questions. But going back to this planting guide, you can see we're really loaded up in terms of our options for January through February. And just a quick overview, um, the artichokes and the asparagus from crowns, understanding that is like a root stock. It's grown for 2 or 3 years, so you're getting something that's more mature. It's not the same as planting from seed or from transplant. So making those designations is key when you're choosing your crops. But we can direct seed a lot of things right now. Root crops, fava beans, the true peas, like the English snap and snow peas. I will say, I think those peas are probably one of the trickier things to grow here for me, just because I never really get them started on time, and then the weather never really cooperates when they're flowering. I remember in January or February of 2021, when we got that monster storm, I had the most beautiful peas. Now, the trellis that I had them growing on, I just wasn't able to protect because it's not something I had thought about. So, um, but other options would be the cool season greens, some leeks. You can seed or transplant those out now. And you can transplant the brassicas like broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. I think it's much better to transplant them at this time. You're just going to get them faster, right? We saw how long some of them can take, and you'll have a head start if you get a little plant that's already growing. Also, we've got onion sets. I just got some, and I'm going to plant those soon, and those will be ready for harvest in late spring, usually in May. Um, that's a really fun crop to grow, and I don't often have to protect them from cold weather. If I can get them established prior to, kind of an event, then they're pretty hardy and delicious. Also, potatoes coming up in early February, and we'll harvest those later in the spring. Those are really fun to do. I love anything that you have to harvest that's buried in the ground because it's just like it's buried treasure, right? And it's also food. All right. there's herbs too. We want to remember these are not on the list that I was showing you, but I want you to be aware because herbs are great to grow. They're oftentimes really approachable. You get a lot of different flavors and benefits from them. So arugula is one of my favorites. You can see that, and oftentimes it germinates in 2 days. But one of the points that I make when I talk about some of these things is like planting from seed versus a transplant. How many parsley plants do you want? And do you need to buy a whole pack of seed? Because there could be like 100 seeds in there. That's a lot of parsley plants. Maybe I just get one plant, but I buy a pack of arugula seeds or something like that. So also cilantro. Oftentimes there's a misinterpretation that cilantro is a warm season crop. But we grow that through the cool season. It will go to seed pretty rapidly when the soil temperatures warm up. So if you like cilantro, now's the time. Also, some more here. I really like to keep the oregano, rosemary, sage, some of those culinary herbs going. They can be really long standing. And again, I usually just when I need one of those, I get a little plant and get that established. So some really good options there. Going out and picking some fresh herbs from your garden in the morning when those essential oils are nice and concentrated is that's just what it's all about. That whole experience. I love growing greens this time of year. I've always done a lot of kale and lettuce, spinach, and the Asian greens. I gotta admit they have become one of my favorites just because of the diversity and the colors and the textures. Um, all of these can mature pretty quickly. Cold hardy reliably down to the upper 20s when they're established. You can get a cut and come again harvest from them as well. So they're going to be a long term producer, and you can keep planting. And as you have plants that you either want to harvest the whole plant, you can drop in another one so you can keep on growing. And like I said, you get a good variety of colors and textures and flavors with these leafy greens. And I like that because it's like, you know, painting or choosing the palette for your breakfast or your lunch or your dinner. You go out there in the morning and which leaf is sparkling and speaking to you? What kind of colors are you being drawn to? And you can get a real mix that way. Um, and each day can be different just by choosing, an array of greens. Uh, I love growing broccoli too. There's just something about it. I mean, granted, the broccoli crown itself is kind of like a trophy. If you get a good one, it makes you feel proud. But I like to emphasize that you get a lot of food out of a broccoli plant. Many varieties will produce a healthy amount of side shoots, and those come after you harvest your main broccoli head. And they're almost, I call them vegan drumsticks. You can do all kind of stuff with them. They're really tasty. And you'll get several rounds of those. So a lot of production off of one broccoli plant. If you're going to get it established and care for it, get it through the winter, why not get as much as you can? The tender leaves, the lower leaves, you can harvest those, add those in with your greens. Just usually a couple at a time. I think the other night I went out and took 2 leaves off of each one of my 10 plants, and I had like a stir fry, just like that. And it looked, like I'd hardly taken anything. And also the core of the stem, if that doesn't have to go to waste, you can peel that and you can chop it up and saute it. And I think that just creates a lot of value for that crop. And along with that, like the greens, you've got a variety of colors that you can choose from. So you can really get an elaborate garden. Carrots. Um, yeah, I'm addicted to growing carrots. All different colors, trying new varieties every season, and they're all unique. They all have a different story that goes with them oftentimes. Um, and you can grow a lot of carrots in a small amount of space. I've been pushing it and going with about 36 carrots per square foot. And I like to group my plantings for several reasons, but I'll plant an entire bed and a couple of plantings with carrots so that I'll get a staggered harvest. But also, they'll all take the same care, same fertilizer. They're the same size. I mean, I think it's good to mix plantings. There's benefits in that. But if you're looking kind of at it from a strategic standpoint, um, going back to those peas, which were kind of making it difficult for me. If I've got some carrots or other things planted around them, then it can make it a little bit more difficult or arduous to protect them should that need to happen. Yeah, and I'll often have mine growing in the garden through June. They start to get a little worse for the wear, but you keep them watered, maybe some shade cloth, and you've got like a grocery store, in your backyard. So that's great. I love eating carrots. Beautiful. Lots of other root crops we can do right now too, and I think these are good for the cool season. Not as easy to find selections once we get later into spring. But the beets, radishes, and turnips, they're fairly fast, and you look for those varieties that mature quickly because there will be differences. And I mentioned that days to harvest. That's when we can expect them to be mature. So, in the case of carrots, uh, these can take several months. I mean, to mature. You get a big honking carrot, um, 3, 4, 5 months. Just depends on the amount of sunshine you get through the winter and how well they develop. But if I choose one that's going to produce in 55 days, then that gives me a leg up over something that's going to take like 80 days. It's a pretty big difference. So just some food for thought. Uh, we touched on cover crops in the news. I was glad to hear that. I wanted to put this in here because maybe right now you're taking some time off or it's cold weather. You want to let things lie in the garden. Maybe you just only have a few things going. Cover crops do a lot of really good things for us. And this is just a few to choose from in the fall and the winter: the crimson clover, the hairy vetch, that Austrian winter pea, and then southern peas and buckwheat through the spring and summer. These do a lot of really great things for the garden. They can act as a living mulch. They provide food for pollinators, attracting beneficial insects, and they give a habitat for soil life, right? We keep some plants growing in the ground, and they're the conductors of the soil food web. So without active plants, you have less of that activity. They provide good material. If we want to chop and drop and do some nutrient cycling, you can use them for that. You can also compost them. So a lot of great stuff going on with the cover crops, and we should be planting more of them. So as we move into our March and April selections, you can see we're clearly getting in range past our last average frost, and the options change, but there are some carryover. Things like the beets, the radishes, the Swiss chard, the mustard greens. You'll have a little bit more time to get those in, but I I become increasingly skeptical. About this time of year, I really start to go uh, for the warm season crops. My approach has really become centered around gearing up for summer and getting through the summer, and then gearing up for winter and getting through the winter. So, because I find it's pretty challenging to get my fall crops started in July and August. I don't have an indoor seed starting uh, setup, so that limits me in that regard. Certainly, it is difficult to start those things like broccoli and kale in your garden outside that time of year, but that's when you would want to do it. Um, Nonetheless, that's just kind of what I've adjusted to. I will say over the last 3 winters, um, it's taken a toll. I've had really big gardens, and it's a lot of work to do by yourself. So this is something you have to measure for yourself. What do you want to get out of it? You know, because you can take a small plot or a few containers, whatever space you have. You can grow some herbs and you can grow a few plants. And if we get the worst of the worst, you know, you get another chance to start over. Otherwise, you can really go die hard and do whatever it takes to bring things through, and you can. Um, yeah, I went a little bit lighter in the garden this winter though. Didn't want to move as many rocks, set up a much row cover, but still got a lot going. So the tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, sweet potatoes, we got those coming in on March and April. It's really imperative, the timing on getting these established, because these fruiting crops, you want them to do their thing before it gets really hot. And I think, you know, the past couple of summers, the way it's gone, when we've gotten to that 105 range or higher, that's made it particularly difficult. So if you plant some of these later into April, you know, it's going to be harder. So, but you know, do we have cold temperatures in March? I think you have to walk that line. But timing is key, and I think it pays to get things in early and then get them through. I really want to talk about some of my favorite, what I think are lesser known options. Things like edible gourds. You've got chayote, cucuzi, even the loofah. You can harvest at an immature state, and those are a lot like zucchini. So you don't get the squash vine borer with these. Um, I've had very little pest on these plants. So I think they're an alternative to experiment with. That chayote, that one is tricky. I have not gotten one to fruit. Now, my understanding is that they are a day length sensitive crop. So, you know, take 140, 160 days. And a lot of times it's around, you know, October when they start to flower. So by the time they are fruiting, we could be getting one of these Arctic fronts. That being said, if you get them through the winter, I think it is possible to almost perennialize those. That being said, I haven't done it. So there's that. But I think it's cool. This is, if you're not familiar with them, this is what they look like. Kind of remind me of the plant in Little Shop of Horrors, the way it kind of puckers up there at the end. But yeah, if you sprout these, you can't really grow them from seed. You sprout the plant or the fruit here, rather, and a vine will come out of that crazy looking mouth. Uh, I've been told that they taste somewhat like asparagus. So maybe there's food in it for us besides the fruit itself. Something to consider. Lesser known items. This is the loofah I grew and I enjoyed it. Beautiful flowers on this. I didn't include a photo, but really unique flower, just a little bit different and very squash-like, zucchini-like in flavor and easy. Grew up a trellis, but no pests. Yeah, warm season greens. These have, I just really love these. I realize not everyone is going to have this and say, I like the way that tastes. Maybe it's mucilaginous or it tastes kind of grassy, but these are super nutritious. And if you can grow this in your backyard or in your community garden, or you know, on a sunny balcony somewhere, you're going to be doing good things for your body, for your family. Things like malokia, also known as Egyptian spinach. There's a lot of uh, nutrition in amaranth. There's some specific amaranth varieties. I like the red leaf amaranth and the callaloo. I grew that one last summer. It was really good. Malabar, I'll admit, it does have a unique texture to it, but if you harvest them young, um, they can go a long way. And what I like to do is harvest a little bit of this one, a little bit of that one, and then I'm usually throwing in some herbs, typically basil. It lifts the flavor, it kind of marries them together, and a lot of times I'm eating them raw, I may do a little saute with some of these, but sweet potato greens, you should, think about that one too. More nutritious than spinach, and it grows like crazy. Um, so just some alternative warm season greens that are really nutritious. If you haven't seen the Malokia, that's the one on the left there. That's a long-standing crop. The last 2 summers I grew these, planted in May, no problem, no shade cloth, and I just kept picking them. You can top them when they get to about 2 feet, and they'll branch. I think they're really good. It's a fairly thin leaf, almost kind of savory, like a spinach like with a little, I love them. And the amaranth there on the right, to me, something alluring about beautiful food. I'll try it. I want to like it, even if I'm like, I have to get used to that. I'm like, I'm gonna keep doing it because I bring these into my kitchen, and my partner is like, and I'm like, yeah, just feel like a winner. But it's all in the crop selection and uh, to try them. These are really easy to save seed from too, so that makes a bonus. Yeah, just a variety here to kind of show you. Like, I mean, there's some perpetual spinach, some uh, Gynura, the longevity spinach. Um, oh, the French sorrel, some herbs. I really love. So it's kind of like a general mix. There's some mint in there too. What I'll be eating on through the summer. Uh, Recent new favorite, cucumber melons. I I I made a video one time about my favorite cucumber, the Suyo Long. I thought it was the champ, and it was a little tongue in cheek. I'm like, champion cucumber. I'm like whatever. It is. I just like it. So really great guy that I went on to meet. Jay from cucumbershop.com commented that I should look at some of these other options. And, it was very diplomatic, and I was like, I want to try it. So he ends up mailing me a couple of varieties. And the first season, I was late planting them, a little bit too hot to really get them going, but I tried again. This season, oh my gosh, I mean, just grew from spring all the way into fall. I grew 4 varieties. There was one in particular that I'll show you that came back really well. But these don't get bitter in the heat. They're essentially immature melons that have been cultivated over time. Many of them in southern Italy, and they're. My partner's like, tastes like a cucumber. I'm like, okay, great, we did it. Yeah, because cucumbers can be tricky. You get them going, you can get a bunch all at once, and then when it gets hot and they get stressed, they can turn bitter pretty rapidly. They get that moisture stress and start looking all weird. So an option to consider. The Armenian is fairly common. You may be familiar with that one, but the Caracello varieties from southern Italy are great. I'll attempt to say the name. The one on the left, checkered Scarpazzo, something like that. And then on the right is the Caracello Lassesi, I think. I have a hard time with that bit, but they are delicious. You get a feel for when to harvest them, and these these crushed the Suyo Long. I mean, I had just as many of the Suyo Long growing, and the production was great. The lighter one here, I think, is medium long of Barisi. And on the right, that's the one that really came back for me in the fall. It's an Indian variety called Ayra, Ayra. You can find these on cucumbershop.com. There's a lot of good information. I mean, the intention there is to really make these lesser known, well adapted crops available. And I think it's something. All of these are things for us to consider in our growing region because we like to stick with what we know, or we start with what we know. But there's a lot of genetic diversity out there for us to explore, and I think in our region and in particular, as weather extremes fluctuate, it's worth taking a look at them. Okay. So now we're going to talk about what I've started to call adaptive strategies, because I guess I got tired of saying season extension. I mean, it's the same thing, but in my mind, I'm always thinking about this stuff. It's adaptive, right? Because we're going to talk about some things that you'll utilize in the summer, or things that you would use in the summer that you'll use in the winter. But the point is to be ready ahead of time, have your supplies, and to stay ready. I was almost lulled into, just a really sense of paradise this season. I'm like, well, maybe we're going to get a good one. Maybe it's going to be like 2019, 2020, and we won't really get a hard freeze, and this is going to be fun. But then I was like, nope, don't do that, Scott, because you got to stay ready, and it's true. Um, I almost feel like I have like PTSD over these winter storms, because I like to go hard in the winter, and then it comes and you're just like, whoa, I have to work too. Uh, but you see, here during that winter storm, garden is completely covered in snow and ice. Learned a lot from this experience, how that snow and ice acts to insulate plants. I had a big garden planted out, and they were, they're covered for the whole week. So, yeah, I think about 80 to 85% of the crops were great, and but then it really got topsy turvy. I feel like as a kind of reaction to that weather pattern, aphids came on really quickly in March, and some of those other things. It was just, it feels like it's been a bit off kilter since, honestly. But yeah, I want to talk about the low tunnel hoop structures. I've used these for over a decade. Many of the same pieces of PVC that I originally bought. So you're looking at somewhat of an investment to set this up, but it'll last long. They can support a layer of protective fabric. We're going to talk about some different ones. I like to use a 3/8 inch, 12 inch long rebar, and I will drive that into my soil by 6 inches. And then I place a 1/2 inch PVC that's 10 feet long over the rebar, and I arc it over. I have never had any failures, any issues with these. The key is, how I space the hoops 2.5 feet apart. When I've run out of hoops and I didn't have enough, that's when when we had that snow and ice, I started to get some cratering in there. So you got to have enough of them in there to really support the weight of any frozen precipitation if that happens. But I just fasten the covers with spring clips. You can do, various materials there, or various clamps. But then rocks, maybe some, some old lumber to kind of weight down the ends. So this is kind of what the setup looks like. I have a specific way that I like to do it, and it's practical as it relates to my garden design. So you have to think about what space you have and what that looks like. But for me, all my raised beds are 4 feet by 8 feet. And so this is all 10-foot PVC. So I didn't have to cut it at all. And it gives me 40 inches of vertical clearance, which is perfect for my broccoli and my kale, which is usually kind of right up near the top. It's important that you have clearance around the plants. We're going to talk about those points, but I want you to understand the intentionality of the design here. I'm going a little bit wide on purpose, and I don't really have, it's less work. I don't have to cut or do fittings. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. But the basic principles, you want to allow for the plants to grow. Because a lot of times we're using these throughout the season, sometimes for extended periods. But this helps to allow ample airflow, and it really makes harvesting and maintenance easier. If you got something kind of low or a little bit looser on there, it's just, this is a real sturdy structure that gives me a great opportunity to keep growing. And like I said, those broccoli and kale, they get a pretty good size. Now, I mentioned, you know, going a little bit wide. The distance between the edge of this raised bed and where the rebar is planted is 12 inches. So I just take the rebar, set it up near the bed, and flip it up. That's no measuring tape needed. This is my system. Then I know what size shoe I wear. So about 2.5 steps, and I've got my spacing. Let's make this as easy as possible, right? I mean, you're going to do it season after season. Develop your own system. Find the resources that you like that work for you. Just some ideas. But yeah, the frost cloth or the row cover is called it traps solar radiation, accumulates during the day. Um, it is superior to sheets and blankets, but you use whatever you have. Uh, Now we had some good discussion on the greenhouse plastic earlier, and I, I did have some takeaways from that. So I know that there's a useful application for that. I think where I'm coming from on this is that um, you can see some failure when you just go with the plastic, and oftentimes, if we're, it's important to understand, like in the example we had with row cover covered with plastic, I think was the method. That makes a lot of sense to me. But long term, you want to have moisture and air transmission, and several times that I'm leaving my plants covered for a week or longer, and you can do that with the frost cloth. It can be really left in place long term. Yeah, so that's what mine typically look like. You kind of see one in the back there that's flat. If I have some low growing plants, I'll kind of modify. I might just put some type of fencing or something on top of there, and fix the row cover in place because it doesn't need to be that high. And sometimes the hoops are a little bit more clearance than I need. But again, this is just an easy way for me to approach it based on my garden. But that frost cloth, it's 100% spunbound polyester. You have different weights available. A lot of them are 6 to 8 degrees of protection at 1.5 ounce. The 2.5 ounce gives you more at 10 degrees, and that's what I've started using more of, just because of the extremes we're getting. And if you're gonna have to invest in this stuff, then get the strongest stuff you can. But the results do vary based on the duration of the sub-freezing temperatures. I mean, we're going to have daytime heating, but there's going to be some limitations to it, just specific to the crops and what their tolerance is and their maturity. You also want to consider the wind chill factors, because it's not only the nighttime lows, right? The wind chill can do some damage. So you need to gear up for protection. Multiple layers can help. I know that was mentioned earlier. I think that's a really great approach and necessary, as well as low tech passive solar heating elements. Like you could do jugs of water, you can do stones. These are going to help to absorb some of that solar radiation, kind of make a heat bank for you. So this is without putting in candles or incandescent Christmas lights. You could look at something like that. But those lights, incandescent lights as a heat source, can be really helpful. It's anything you can do. You want to do it safely, and make sure you're in good shape there. But a little bit of heat is often necessary if you truly want to bring some of these plants through the events that we get. So this is kind of how I do when I've got like some low growing crops and I got these giant hoops on them. Last January, ahead of the ice storm, I had planted like 200 lettuce, and they were really itty bitty, and I wanted to bring them through. So I doubled up some row cover, and I just kind of pinned it down. I used this 14 gauge galvanized fencing for trellising, but I also put it over my seed beds to keep critters out, usually cats, but like foxes will just run right through it. But um, I use like that can help rest the row cover on, and then some rocks to pin it down. I put the cover on top of the hoops too, so that was 3 layers of protection. And if you see in the front of this bed, there's some, they're raised up. I took some planter buckets that were had some snapdragons, I think they were coming on, and I put the bucket over the snapdragon, just created a little tent to keep the weight off of the plants. So I didn't have a picture of that specifically, but that's what's going on under there. There's a lot of different ways you can put these together. Hope this gives you some ideas. But those seedlings and the young plants are going to be most vulnerable. So if you're starting out now, or you've got some things that are fairly young, you want to make sure you're protecting them. They can have their growth stunted, they'll bolt sooner than they might otherwise. Um, they will benefit from protection, not just from freezing weather, but when if it's like 50 or under for several days, just cold, particularly when the plants are young, that will kind of trigger them to uh, either be stunted or bolt. So it's something to think about. Even if we're not getting the harshest weather, protect the young plants. I want to talk about shade cloth. It's something I use a lot of, not only in the hot time of year, but in the winter. Um, these these spinach here are probably ready to come out, but I wanted to keep them going as long as I could. So I put some shade cloth over my hoops there. So 40% shade cloth. Uh, yeah, it keeps the soil cooler, less sun exposure. It's usually a knitted or woven material. You could use what you had. Some people talk about using cardboard and making like a baffle to maybe the hottest part of sun. Depends on your microclimate, your specific garden, but the 40% is really ideal for all day coverage for most of the year. During the summer, you could go up to like 50% for your tomatoes. Really will help to buffer the conditions and extend the season for them, and focus on that southwest exposure, or even exposure that is heat or light radiating off of a building or a structure. You can get some amplification of the heat with that. So I'm protecting the southwest corner as much as possible. Here's an example. Now, I'm very intentional in not completely covering the raised bed, because just like frost cloth, shade cloth does have some insulating capacity if you completely, cover your bed. So you want to leave room for airflow. On the other end, it's completely wide open. There's usually some airspace on the left and right side, but the hottest sun is going to be in the southwest sky, and I've got that covered. Now, turns out what I've learned over the last 2 summers is that this is really like a stopgap measure, a season extender. I have full sun in my garden. I didn't used to, but hurricanes and hackberries, things change. So full sun is a lot here. And I think in general they recommend vegetables get a minimum of 6, as much as 8 hours of sun. But in Central Texas, I think we need a break. And these low tunnel structures go a long way. However, if you can build up more of a canopy, I think that's ideal. If you have a hoop structure, like a polytunnel covered with shade cloth instead, that would be the dream, because I think it gives you room to work, and it helps the plants get through. So I've kind of been devising a method for that. I put some shade cloth on stilts this summer in August, mind you. So it's kind of like a last ditch effort, which is probably good because bamboo and zip ties only go so far. But you experiment and you try to create things for your garden, and it's really fulfilling. Um, Also want to emphasize the importance of mulching the soil, particularly bare soil. You don't want to leave that soil exposed. You're going to be insulating it which is going to be helpful during the cool season. It's conserving moisture, keeping weeds back, soil-borne diseases. You get some heavy rain on your spring tomatoes, the soil is splashing on the leaves. You don't want that. You got a nice layer of mulch there to kind of make a physical barrier. There's less potential for soil-borne disease to be transmitted. And most of all, it benefits the soil microbes, gives them a nice little cozy place to be year-round. So generally, I'm using pine straw. I like that one because I can reuse it. I'll gather it up, I'll put it in a big bin, and I'll use it for several seasons, at which point it will probably begin to break down and I can compost it. But I like the way that it takes water. It's really permeable. Takes some getting used to and working with it, especially with a fresh bale of pine straw. Kind of arduous to get in there, but it's good stuff. The hardwood mulches, in my opinion, tend to cake more and actually make a barrier to moisture. So, but you use what you can and what you have. Liquid seaweed is something that I have been using for years. I really think this gives us advantages year-round, as it helps to build resilience in plants by acting as a preconditioning element, stress relief, developing roots, getting established plants established rapidly. You can apply it throughout the growing season as a foliar spray. Those micronutrients can get uptaken a bit. A soil drench is a great application for it too. Yeah, it's the cytokinins, are the plant hormones, and they'll promote cell division, which can make the leaf surfaces tougher. So throughout the fall and the winter, religiously, applying seaweed to help kind of bolster them. They get preconditioned in that way, and then we get the extremes, whether it's hot or cold, they have a little bit extra protection. It's said that it offers like 1 degree of frost protection, which we take whatever we can get. Yeah, so I like it. Usually am using the MaxiCrop soluble seaweed, because this one is OMRI listed, and the liquid concentrate isn't. And that number, the 0017, is once you dilute it, that there's a technicality in the way that's has to be presented for this form, but it's more like a 001. So this is a very sustainable and economical option. You don't have all that water coming from some other city going on a truck around the place. The soluble one, I put it in a mason jar that's halfway filled up with water, and then I put the cap on and I shake it up really vigorously, and it can take a little work, but that dissolves it really well. That's the chief complaint I usually hear with the soluble seaweed, is it gets clumpy and doesn't mix up real well. But there's all kind of seaweed options out there. A lot of times, like in the MicroLife, they've got some good seaweed in their mix. So combination fertilizers will give you that. Just one of those things that I really advocate for. Yeah. So thank you for listening to my gardening business. Like I said, it's really a pleasure to be here to share my experience. I, started my mission as, a gardening educator, to pass along, any experience that's been shared with me, my joy for gardening, my interest in helping us all, create a more healthy, sustainable world for ourselves. One garden at a time is a way we can do it, whether it's a balcony, a window, community garden, a farm. I mean, these are all integral pieces. So thank you. Questions?
Where do you suggest we look for row cover? What are some really good?
So number one, the question was, where can you get row cover, or what's a good source? And shadeclothstore.com is a distributor. They do shade cloth and row cover. You can get it uh, in various weights and sizes. Um, I I love the Natural Gardener. I worked there for a long time, so I love going to see my friends in the gardens, and you can get it down there. The prepackaged stuff is probably the medium duty. That's 6 to 8 degrees of protection, but they carry the heavyweight on a bulk roll, so you get it cut to length, and it's 12 feet wide. Um, it is an investment, but I have invested in some trash cans, and I just either sometimes I fold it, it fits better, but I'll stuff it in there, and it's real easy to store that way. But um, shadeclothstore.com or the Natural Gardener, you can find it other places, big box stores, but just look at the weight of it. Make sure you understand what you're getting. And regardless, some of these weather events, we need a lot too. So, yeah.
How often do you apply the seaweed?
Yeah. So, usually the package will say every 2 weeks, but I apply it every week because I like to get out in my garden every week and have that experience and get underneath the leaves. It gives me a chance to spend time and observe for pests and disease. Now, if I skip a week, it's no big deal. But that's easier schedule for me once a week. Every 2 weeks, I'm like, when did I do it last? So did you have a question?
Yeah. So I was going to ask you. So I love the pine straw, but it's really difficult when you plant seeds like carrots and stuff because I'm always afraid they're not. Well, some of them don't come up because the pine straw is on top of them. So it becomes a bit problematic with smaller plants.
Yes. Yeah. So the question.
So what do you do with? So you just not put any.
Yeah. So the question was around pine straw, and it's it will suppress plants, seedlings in a way, which is true. I don't usually add the pine straw, and if I'm planting 36 carrots per square foot, there's going to be a period of time when the soil is exposed, which is less than ideal. However, before long, it's completely covered with foliage. I think that's one strategy with, mass plantings. I don't have a farm; it's a garden, but I kind of like that technique. But with the others, and once they're, have 3 or 4 sets of leaves, I'm gonna, as quickly as I can get in there and work it around. And it is a lot of work, but that's how I do it. So sometimes there's a period of no mulch.
So I know you use rebar, and I've done that before, but I've also fallen over rebar in my garden. So do you have any method of like making sure that you're not going to trip over and stab yourself?
Yeah, well, I've learned the hard way. But I think my key is as soon as I take the PVC off of it, I I put it right back on as quickly as I can. I'm very mindful about it. I don't. Yeah, I just have to be. You have to be really careful with it. I mean, there's a lot of things like that around the garden, but it's really just comes down to mindfulness around it.
So you pretty much leave the
I do.
PVC.
I do. I don't necessarily like the way it looks, but it's easier than going back and forth. So that's my approach.
What do you think on use of coffee grounds in the garden bed, not just compost?
What's the take on using coffee grounds in the garden bed besides the compost?
I know it goes in compost.
Yeah.
I've been using it in my bed
Yeah.
successfully. That's cold last week. I shouldn't.
Did they give you a reason?
Pardon?
Did they give you a reason?
Yeah, it was a very strange reason to me because they said it pulled the nitrogen out of the soil.
Yeah, it's possible.
I don't want to get to about one coffee grounds.
Yeah.
Not
Um,
just wondering if you had any.
Yeah, I, I, I don't have any direct experience with it. I know that there's a little nitrogen in the coffee grounds.
Right,
I don't know, yeah,
along with other
Mm.
elements, so. I mean,
But-
I've used them for the last 5 years.
sure. Yeah, so I think the proof is in the pudding, right? Yeah, that's all there is to it. Now, I think organic matter in general and nutrient cycling in the soil, like I think you can go a long way. There's some things you have to be careful with, right? But by and large, things like that, I think,
I've done well. Even last year, I even just, some of my beds looked a little short of last year, so I just threw the leaves directly in the beds and fixed
Yeah.
them up and then planted.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
so,
yeah. I think
Okay.
like fresh wood chips
yeah.
that are
oh, no,
really
not the wood chips,
those would be the one thing, fresh wood chips that are really green, not aged, will, they can rob the nitrogen in their
but-
process
right,
of
that's what
breaking
they were
down. But
saying.
yeah,
Okay.
chop and drop, coffee grounds.
Because, well, no, and it's just, and eggshells too, and I'm sitting there, things I use most.
Right?
So, I was just wondering if maybe I just had a free card and I did better.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Good question though. Who else has got a question? Oh, you already asked one. I'm gonna go for you again though. Let's go.
What's your opinion of using newspaper or cardboard?
Okay, so the question is, what's the opinion on using newspaper or cardboard to help eradicate weeds? I think it's probably perfectly fine. Now, if you're really sensitive or concerned about it, do the research. Source it. Soy-based inks, to my understanding, have less effects. The cardboard, if you look for food grade cardboard, that could be a good way. Fruits and vegetable packaging. These food grade items, I think, are a good line for that. But certainly taking off, any kind of tape or adhesive. And I generally use it for my pathways, and I feel like it's, if I'm encouraging biodiversity and healthy soil in my garden ecosystem, then you have some remediation capacity with those. So I think Austin had one. Go ahead.
What do you do with your frost cloth once it rips?
Double layer.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot.
Turn two to one. Turn the old ones into one.
The question was, what do you do when your frost cloth rips? And I think you had to get creative. But I've used some for insulating, pipe fittings around my house, protecting grafts of fruit trees, things of that nature. It's that lighter weight. It's more like an insect netting. That's the one that you can just almost poke a hole through with your finger. So after I got some of that, I never got it again. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got probably a 50-gallon bucket, pretty much full of compost, had in there for several months now. And I wanted to use it in the spring, to put on the garden stuff, but does compost have like a shelf life? It only lasts for, only good for a certain number of months or years or anything about that?
I would, not that I could certify this opinion, but I think it's not going to go bad. It's going to break down. It's going to evolve and change and become earth. That's
What it looks like now.
Yeah.
It just looks like dirt. I'm wondering if it's good dirt.
yeah. If it, as long as it doesn't have an off odor, like now, I don't know if I stated the question, but it was, is there a shelf life for compost? If it doesn't have any kind of off odor, if it smells earthy, then I think it's in good shape.
I wanted to mention too, we were talking about cardboard, someone on the YouTube channel shared that if your cardboard and you know, we should all just look this up and do a little more research, but if it has something that feels water resistant, it's probably using PFAS or chemicals that don't break down. So make sure that you are not using cardboard that has stuff sprayed on it to make it water resistant or water retardant, because it's likely got PFAS. And those are endocrine disruptors, really terrible for the soil, for the water. It's all over. EPA is trying to figure out how to clean up water right now.
And those on, is that on those leaf bags that you get from Home Depot?
Yes. So if it's got like that lining,
Oh,
That's-
no.
feels anything feeling water resistant, food lining all has it. Yeah, it's everywhere.
Ew.
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah. We all have it in us.
Yes.
The
Question for
stuff, we got, this doesn't seem to last super long, it gets, all I actually, found some vehicles at a place called Austin Creative Reuse.
Mm.
And I just love the fact that you buy something, or do something, not being thrown away, maybe has more durability, and I've got a lot of
Mm.
fabric there.
Yeah. So it was mentioned Austin Creative Reuse for essentially an alternative to frost cloth, something that you can reuse that is durable.
Maybe a little more durable.
Nice. Yes.
I have a single pepper plant, a single tomato plant that have survived and managed to thrive through all the crazy weather this summer. And they've kind of gone dormant for a little while, but they're starting to put out new growth. And they're in the ground. And I'm wondering if it's too late to pull them out and move to my greenhouse, or should I try to winter them where they are, or should I just leave them? They have so much new growth right now.
Yeah. I mean, it just points to the fact. I mean, the question was around a tomato and a pepper plant that are growing in the ground, have put on new growth, and your question is it too late to dig them up and bring them inside? If I was really attached to them, I would probably try it. The tomato, I don't know I would be invested in, honestly, but I don't.
I just want to like see what happens.
Yeah.
But if I was like too late.
Yeah, I'm not anti-tomato, don't get me wrong, because I know that's a passionate subject. But you know, they're gonna that one will probably fare worse in that regard. The peppers can be kind of remarkable in that way. I have one in a fabric pot that I've had out all winter unprotected, and it's looks pretty happy. So you can grow them in containers. So, but I think you probably want to do it for this before this cold spell if you're going to do it, and you know, give it some TLC. Don't overwater it. You know, consider some seaweed if you have some on hand, or protect it in place. I think you'll fare better with the pepper than the tomato. Anything's possible, I think. Yeah. Yes, sir.
If the tomato is that good and the growth is nice and healthy, I would recommend taking cuttings.
Yes.
That way, if the roots have nematodes, it's so common, we'll be avoiding that in the greenhouse. And they root easily. And you can protect them, keep them warm, get that fruit in a couple of months.
Excellent follow-up to that question about, you know, relocating the tomato was take cuttings, root the cuttings,
Put them in water.
put them in water. They'll root
Leave
out
them inside.
a couple weeks. Yeah. Yes.
So have you ever buried a plant? I mean, I'm just, you know, to actually protect it.
Like a tomato.
Like explosive, yeah.
Yeah, like I had a bell pepper plant last 3 years. Yeah, but I mean, I TLC,
Mm.
you know, clearly, but I was shocked.
Yeah. I think that's worth experimenting with.
But the question is, well, then I actually had one pepper plant fall down. It was too heavy, and I literally just cut it, I buried it.
Mm,
The loop that
mhm.
was just taking up too much space.
Yeah. Another great follow-up to that question. I love being in this group of gardeners because the follow-up was that you could bury the plants, as a way to protect them, and that was the experience. So I think that's another worthwhile opportunity. Yeah, it's kind of like the term that they refer to when we're protecting like fruit trees in the graft. There's something called banking. I believe that's the term where they hill up soil or mulch around the graft point. It's going to capture solar radiation. It's going to act like a physical barrier to the cold. So some good strategies.
I
Yes.
have a different question. Last summer I put shade cloth on my garden, 3% shade cloth. It just really affected the bloom and the flowering of my peppers. And I had some lantana growing in hanging baskets. A bunch of stuff just didn't do well after that. Too shady for it.
Well, it's possible, but extreme prolonged heat
Yeah.
may also interfere with flowering and fruit set. So kind of have to. That's been my experience over the last couple of summers. Some of the fruiting crops, once they hit, that second week of July, it just ground to a halt, and they'll survive. But others like the Malokia or the cucumber melon, I'm able to get a little bit of fruit off of those, more so than the others, with some shade cloth too in some instances. So that's a good point. Whether or not the shade cloth inhibits flowering and fruit set by decreasing sunlight. I think it would be important to evaluate your exposure. If you've got some late day shade or some dapple light in any spots, yeah.
I just
So-
have morning sun kind of shade, but that goes pretty quick.
Mm.
It's full blaze of
Yeah.
sunshine all that facing south.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, these plants weren't, they were out of the base. It's pretty warm back then.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. Well, we got about 20 minutes to kind of wrap up and get out of here before 9 o'clock. So we've got seeds for everyone. Snacks.
Would you like to become a
Member, yes. And come talk to me if you want to help out in the veggie gardens here at Zilker. Yeah, don't forget to grab mushroom blocks on the way out. But everybody, another round of applause.
Thank you, everyone who joined online.
Yes, I do.